Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's Thought Leadership webinar event. So some quick introductions. I'm Matt Stringer. I'm the Chief Exec here at the Education Showroom, and we're delighted to be joined by some fabulous special guests and panelists today, which we're going to shortly be introducing you to. And we have an action-packed agenda as well to cover in the next 40 to 45 minutes. But today's hot topic for the webinar is around the rise, the spike of problematic behaviour in schools and across multi-academy trusts. And that's what we're here today to discuss, to debate, and to hear from our expert panelists as to what they're doing in their schools and multi-academy trusts around managing the spike of problematic student behaviour. We're also delighted to welcome a couple of gentlemen who will introduce themselves shortly, which is Danny and Michael, who are from a fabulous organisation called Aspire BM, BM meaning Behaviour Management. And Danny and Michael are going to be sharing with us how they are helping schools and multi-academy trusts across the country as well with regards to managing problematic behaviour. So that's what we're here to do today. And I'm delighted to introduce our panelists. I'm just going to go around each person in turn. Vaseem, welcome to your Thought Leadership panelist session. So thank you very much. Vaseem, if you could just give a little bit of context for everybody, a little bit about yourself and your school, sir, please, if you would, Vaseem.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, guys. My name is Vaseem. I work in a primary school in the Midlands in Birmingham. And so the background for me really is I've been working in education for 20 years and in leadership for the last 10 years. And my remit is subject lead, but also pastoral side. So I'll look at behavior as well and work with the faculty team as well to implement different behavior strategies, which we'll discuss later. And the results of, sorry, I'm working in the same school now for the last 7 years is really had its success, especially since COVID as well. So we'll talk about that later and talk about our success stories as well.
That's great, Vaseem. Fantastic introduction. Thank you. Dave McPartland, good afternoon. Welcome to the event, and we'd love to hear a little bit about you, Dave.
Hi, I'm Dave McParlin. I'm the head teacher of Fleet Primary School in Fleetwood, 2-form entry school. We've got a 2-year-old nursery, 3-year-old nursery, about 55% free school meals. Been here 10 years, 5 years headship before that. And I'd probably say what everyone else is saying, that it's quite full on at the minute, no matter where you are in the country, where, whatever your setting is, it's a bit full on, isn't it, at the minute?
Dave, great introduction. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Nick Brindle, delighted to see you, Nick. How's things? And we'd love for a little intro on yourself, sir, please.
They're very well, even though, I can't excuse that my grey matter is not working at this time of the day. But yeah, Nick Brindle, I'm the CEO of the S Trust. We are soon to be a 9-school multi-academy trust of alternative provision and special ed schools. And we have children from that are on palliative care, unfortunately, that we're enriching their lives all the way through to prison, and everything in between. And for my sins, I'm a RISE advisor as well, so don't ask.
Quite the introduction, Nick. Thank you very much indeed. And from a supplier, an expert supplier who we have a fabulous relationship with, I'm delighted to introduce Danny and Michael, directors of Aspire BM. So Danny, if you would, a little intro from yourself, sir, please, Danny.
Yeah, afternoon, everyone. Yeah, my name's Danny Marr. I'm director of Aspire Behaviour Management. We've been going for, Aspire's been going for 10 years now. Providing, our main aim is to provide real support to schools, multi-academy trusts. We provide services around outreach where schools commission our service, our outreach service into their schools, and also have quite a large substantive training arm as well, where we provide both face-to-face, remote and virtual training as well as part of our offer and support to schools to deal with some significant challenges that schools are having really every day with what we're talking about today in the webinar. So yeah, that's a little bit about us as an organisation.
Thanks, Danny. That's great. And Michael, a quick hello. It'd be lovely to hear from you.
Yeah, I'm Michael. I'm from Aspire Behaviour Management. And I mean, Danny's introduced us pretty much as well as he can. But my passion for this is a bit more personal. My son's autistic. Been working obviously at Aspire. I've been with Danny for 8 years now. Yeah, so I've seen the impact that services like ours, as well as schools and parents, can have on autistic children personally, and I really like making that happen across the country.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Michael. That's a lovely introduction. And we start everybody with today's first question. And I'm going to start with posing the question to Dave, if you don't mind, Dave, and then we'll go around the panel. So I'll start with Dave McPartlin for question number one. Dave, so we hear a lot, we've read a lot, we've seen a lot about the impacts of COVID-19 and therefore lockdown on student behaviour. But outside of lockdown, outside of COVID, what are you seeing in your school and surrounding areas? You know, what kind of do you believe is happening, which is creating these problematic situations and behaviour to be at times on the rise? What is that looking like from your surrounding areas and your school, Dave, to start us off with?
I found myself, you know, when you talk about problematic behaviour, I think I would probably use the word different. It's very, very different behaviour. You know, so after COVID, and I'm not blaming it, you know, not to say about COVID, the disease, the lockdown, and everything else that went with it. But when we've come back, we're seeing an increase in, you know, much greater challenge down in nursery, reception, year one, you know, behaviours that we didn't really see in the past. And you know, previously it might be year fives and sixes, you know, pushing each other, winding each other up, you know, doing things that kids we don't want them to do, but typically kids do fall out. Whereas a lot of the more challenge, you know, the bigger challenges we face are further down the school. So the strategies that work with your older children don't necessarily work anywhere near as well in the same way with the younger children. And that's, you know, I'm lucky I get out and about and I do a bit of speaking. I meet with other head teachers. You know, everyone's saying it across the country, but nobody. I think there's a reluctance to talk publicly about it because you don't understand like you're doing your school down. The reality is, it's incredible within school. I tweeted the other day, the school's singing, but the level of effort and hard work and commitment and resilience and perseverance that it takes to, you know, to keep it going feels very, very difficult. We're not sure what it is. You know, is it the lack of interactions and the social, you know, people weren't as social obviously during lockdown? Is it the school nurses and public services weren't able to reach out and support the families? Is it an increase of on-demand services? You know, in terms of the kids watching YouTube, if they don't like something, they go on the next clip, and then the next clip. Netflix is all on demand, so they don't have to sit through programs like we did when we were kids. We're not quite sure, but it just feels very, very different to what it did, you know, prior to lockdown.
Thanks, Dave. And we'll go over to Vaseem. So Vaseem, same question, please, if you don't mind. So it's again in your community, around your school and within your school, outside of lockdown, what are you seeing? What do you think is causing? What are you experiencing from a, you know, what could potentially be leading to this spike in challenging student behaviour? You're on mute there, Vaseem.
Sorry about that. So the school that I work at is in the city of Birmingham, and the community, the schools around it, very deprived in the area. Compared to free school meals, around 90% of the children in the school that I work at are free school meals, and pupil premium is at all-time high. So especially when COVID hit, this was a big loss for our community, our parents. Most of our parents, English is additional language with them, so that communication wasn't there. So coming back from COVID, it was a shock to the teachers because there was a big difference. And there were some teachers, when schools partially open for the vulnerable children, it was hard to get parents for special needs children to come in, and vulnerable because they were still worried, thinking that if I send my child in, but the government's still saying stay at home, but it's okay for certain service to be open, and they were unsure. And even staff were unsure as well what to do as well. So it really had a big impact with our children, with our communities. And I think the biggest thing was when children did come back, it was the rate of absenteeism.
Okay.
Not all classes were full, but as schools, we need to find out what the situation is, and parents were still worried about it. Some parents would actually go to the point saying, my child doesn't want to come to school anymore, he wants to stay at home. And in our areas, some schools did remote learning, some schools gave working packs, but it didn't have the justification, the same impact of face-to-face teaching. And this is where the behavior came. In inner city Birmingham, the crime rate is really high anyway, in that sense. But then siblings, children, they didn't want to come to school. They were so used to staying home, and when COVID kind of lifted slightly, they started going out a bit, and for them, their routine changed, and it was hard to get children and parents back on track. But I will explain later what strategies we used as our school, and it worked really well. But it's making sure that parents, children understood how important, how vital was for them to come back, which would de-escalate the behavior issues that were going on outside as well.
Thanks, Basim. That's really interesting. Thank you. And Nick, from a multi-academy trust-wide perspective, being able to have a lens across lots of settings, lots of schools that you oversee and manage, what are you seeing? What have you observed? What have your staff observed as to what could be reasons for this spike in problematic behaviour, Nick?
I mean, yeah. So I could say we're removing more knives from kids because we are, and take a level there. But I sort of, if I round off what Vaseem and Dave was just saying there, I think there's three wider factors that have impacted following, return to whatever normal is now. That's sort of penning out, and I do think they all feed into one another. You've got the excessive preaching. When I say preaching, it's right to do so, but around well-being. And actually, you speak to some parents that believe actually a kid having a day off a week or 2 days off a week is good for their well-being. Because they feel stressed, and actually it's not that we're not sharing the proper information as to what absenteeism actually does to their wider outcomes and ability to be successful in later life. Plus, you then have the economic factors of a very, very extreme cost of living crisis. People are more worried because they've got financial insecurity, and therefore they are working more, spending less time with kids. They're telling kids no more because they can't afford to do things, and therefore that all has quite a negative connotation in the home. You then have in schools and the rise of whether multi-academy trusts. I run one, so I don't actually think they are the ultimate solution to the betterment of education, and not in the ilk they are now. But one thing I found through a lot of the wider work that I have the privilege of doing is the standardization that is being brought into schools through particularly larger maths is actually stifling the profession's creativity, where actually you have classrooms that don't enrich the curriculum because they must have 10 minutes of this and 10 minutes of that. And consistency, just to flag up, is actually one of the reasons how you can overcome poor behavior. But actually it's to a absolute extreme where the staff don't have any room to actually show the love of learning, which promotes boring lessons. And kids, and now, and this is the final point, and then I'll shut up. You should know this, Matt, I'll go on too much. But the final point is kids now have more access to more information than ever before. Right?
Yeah.
If you're born in this day and age, you have more information at your fingertips than you would in your entire lifetime if you're born in 1900. So they are now, and because we are promoting them to ask, why do I learn this? What is the, when you're stagnated into, we're going through this because the curriculum just says so, and you're then not giving staff the ability to say, well, we're learning it because this will lead to this or help you with this. They're actually saying, well, why do I have to learn this? And what's the point? And without really robust conversation back, you see low-level defiance, refusal to go to lessons. And then you have parents that already have enough on their plate supporting their child and saying, well, I don't think you should be pushing my child. And it's this negative cycle, the cycling, and I see it cycling through. So that's, where I see an escalation.
Incredibly insightful, Nick. Thank you very much indeed. Very, very interesting. Danny and Michael, I'll pose a question to you gents together, if you don't mind. And thanks, Hayley, for your comments in the chat. Yag and Catherine, I'm sure will observe those, and we'll have an opportunity later to throw questions out to the group. So thanks, Hayley. That's great. And everybody else, if you do have any questions, please pose them in the chat room as Hayley is doing. That's brilliant. Thank you. Danny and Michael, again, what's really interesting about these sessions every month we hold them is the different lenses that you get to see. So Dave's lens, the themes, and Nick's, and again, yours is different entirely. Across the different schools and multi-academy trusts, which obviously is a vast number that you help and support every day and every week, what are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you helping to help manage in regards to the why question? Why are we seeing, outside of COVID, a spike in challenging behaviour? What are your clients or your schools and maths? What are you hearing and seeing, guys?
Yeah, I think there's so many factors. I think that's the key thing to say. You know, I think I've said it before, and probably, lots of people have probably heard it, but behavior is a form of communication. Children and young people are trying to communicate to us what is going on for them, potentially where they're not able to verbalize that really. But there are so many factors in terms of, and, as I'm sure Dave and Vaseem and Nick will kind of agree with, so many factors to why children and young people may behave in these challenging ways, that we're seeing really in schools and maths and things. It could be things around trauma, for example. So children that might be experiencing some form of trauma, whatever that may be, and that could be as simple as separation within families, bereavement, right to the extremes of neglect and abuse of the various sorts really. So there's all those factors around that, which kind of links into things such as adverse childhood experiences, and many people may have heard about ACEs and adverse childhood experiences, but those are real key kind of things in terms of how children and young people are struggling to cope in the world because of those issues. And then because those emotions, they can't regulate those in an appropriate way, potentially, that's coming out then in the only way they know and potentially are able to show that really, and that's through those challenging behaviours that we're seeing. So I suppose it harks back to what Dave and Vaseem and Nick have already mentioned really around that. We're also seeing. I think Nick mentioned about families and the kind of interaction within families, etc. And I think factors where there are really poor mental health issues or significant parental mental health issues, where that then has a significant impact on parents' interactions with the children. And then, what we're seeing, and I don't know if, leaders will agree with this, what we're seeing in schools is those interactions that are happening within the home environment actually then coming into schools in terms of their interactions with their peers and with adults within school as well, with with staff and teachers and TAs, etc. And I think, going back to COVID, that's where that comes in a little bit for me, because when we talk about COVID, those lack of interactions that were happening, then at that period of time, 5 years ago, through that process, and something that Dave mentioned about, seeing children now in nursery and reception coming through with actually those real challenges and those lack of interaction difficulties really, that's where I believe COVID has had a significant impact. And along with that, the difficulties around speech and language, challenges as well, because of those interactions haven't been there. I think someone's already mentioned about technology being a huge issue, a huge factor, an influence on young people and children. But actually, technology as well is, for some parents in some families, almost a way of parenting. That actually, children are being given tablets, etc., and that is the way. So therefore, what that is then taken away is that positive interaction between parents and children. So I think that has a huge issue as well as part of it. And that kind of, depending on what's going on for those children through those kind of maybe adverse childhood experiences that they're seeing, that then can breed anxiety and different issues within children and young people. that then they bring into school and our education settings, and having
Yeah.
significant difficulties with that. Just today, I've been in a school just today, and there's not been one factor where we've been seeing a number of children within that school today, 5 or 6 children within that school, and there are all different factors to the reasons their challenges are there and their behaviours are there. One particular child has had issues around, neurodevelopmental factors where potentially we're looking at an early identification of, a child that may be on the autistic spectrum really struggling with those social communication needs, to another child that we've been supporting and looking at that actually is a looked after child that has had significant adverse childhood experiences. So I think the fact of the matter is there isn't one factor. That there's a number of different factors that are causing these difficulties and challenges within children in school where they are struggling to regulate. And then that struggle in that regulation because of the emotional needs then comes out in the behaviour. And that's very easy to see and very difficult to manage in some situations, but I know we'll go on to that in a little second.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, just to go back to the next question, and that's really useful. Thanks, Danny. That's very, very detailed and very, very insightful. Let's flip this around now, and let's talk about what in each of our special guest panelist schools and maths that the schools and maths have done to try and reduce problematic behaviours. So let's call it strategies. So Vaseem, we're going to start with you, if you don't mind, sir, for this particular question, and then we'll go to Nick after yourself this time, and Dave, and then we'll come back to Danny and Michael. So Vaseem, from a behaviour strategy perspective in your school, what kinds of things have you considered as a school? What kind of things have you adopted and implemented as a school? And which ones in particular, Vaseem, have had the most impact? So what have you thought about? What have you deployed, if you like? And which strategies have had the most impact, Vaseem, please?
Okay. The biggest issue we had when we returned back to schools post-COVID-19 was children who the transition from nursery, the early years, to reception. Those are the children that didn't want to come to school. We had more children being upset. They didn't want to leave parents' hands. They just wanted to stay at home. The rate of absence really was a significant impact. What we did as a school to adjust that was to get parents involved. And we saw for a good half a term, parents was joining in the classes, coming in, working with their child, doing reading with them. And there was a big difference to see how many children calmed down with their behavior. Because the first kind of week or two, we noticed, even the teachers were shocked, thinking they never ever come across children behaving like this. Yes, you might have the 1, 2 our children who come to school a bit reluctant, but we had like good 15, 20 children. So that was the main strategy, that for a good half term, we got early in the morning for a good half an hour to an hour, we got parents involved. They came into the hall, sat down, read with their child, did some work on the whiteboard, and that had a really big impact. Going forward within schools in Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, obviously children's work, their level of results were very down. So what we did our own interventions in the afternoons. We focused on children. We focused on children with borderline, especially with their phonics, their end of Key Stage 2 SATs. We looked at those children, and there was a big dip, but we tried our best, again, getting parents involved as well, relaying extra clubs in Easter, after school clubs, just to get that extra reading, comprehension, and those certain skills that children have lost over time, especially during COVID. Give them an iPad and a laptop. They were on it because they understood, because quite a lot of children did a lot of remote learning. However, some children didn't have access. So it's closing those gaps. I think for me, the biggest impact is our younger children. And parents, like I said, we're in the city of Birmingham. Most of our parents maybe are not working. So they had the opportunity to come to school and liaise with their children, work with their children, and give them that balance. And I think that was needed to close that gap, because many children were just disengaged coming into school. They was too used to being at home, playing on maybe the iPad, not doing no work. And when it came to reading or doing any activities, they found it really hard. They struggled. So it's that key relationship with parents, not just early years, but throughout the school. But it had a significant impact in our early years going on to year one. And that really worked and supported. But I think if we were to ask our staff, it did open the eyes because behavior just increased. There was maybe a handful of lower graspers normally, but there was like 50 to 60% now in that case. So we had to just pull a lot of intervention. And it's only now our intervention is slowly decreasing, the behavior is decreasing, because most of our year 6 now are in year 11 now. But it's only the last reception kids now who are in year 6. So it's slowly, the transition is wearing off. But God forbid if we face another situation, a pandemic, what will happen then?
Thank you very much, Vaseem. Incredibly useful, very, very interesting. And it just goes to show, doesn't it, that connection, that relationship with the parent, just how critically important that is. So thank you, Vaseem. Nick, can we come to you? Strategically, ways, tactics that you've explored, experimented, adopted across your schools, Nick, to try and improve behaviour?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be here all night if I started listing off the things that we did that either was successful or not. But some key takeaways, and perhaps some of the stuff that I would immediately do when I do like emergency school improvement work and things like that. And don't take what I said earlier. Consistency, you know, a one message from staff team, not in terms of to an at whisker, in terms of, as I was saying, the classrooms are making things so rigid that actually we can't operate, but actually a consistent of messaging and the thought process as to why we do things is key. And alongside that, the positive language, positive affirmation, but a child being out of lesson is clearly out of lesson. Most practitioners, when I see them, will say, "Why are you not in lessons?" Well, I'm pretty sure that they're not going to take that. Or where should you be? And they're clearly not where they need to be. And if they do want to open up, they may do, but they probably don't want to open up. And just by changing your language to "Are you okay?" and "Can I help?" immediately takes from a very combative viewpoint into "I'm here to support you. I get that something is wrong because otherwise you wouldn't be here now." And if that's a consistent message where actually students see that you are there to support rather than to control, I see that as a tremendous win, particularly for those cusp children that are often getting a bit of detentions or whatever you want to call in schools. And a wider point that I find that we don't really do in schools is we don't actually listen to the kids. They often tell you what's wrong. So in my world, often with a lot of cursives, but they will generally tell you. Example, most children don't complain about doing English and maths. They complain a lot about the content or that they can't access it. They understand the process as to why English and maths are so important. So they tell you, and you can read between the lines if you actually listen. And the strangest, and I pick this up, again, privilege of the job, I get to go and tour some of the finest establishments in the world, and pick this up from the Finnish system, who put it really, really, a chap I was speaking to, really interestingly, is as adults, we control everything, yet we expect the children to conform to what we think they need. Where actually, given that we can control everything and change anything, sometimes it's perhaps us that just need to listen and go, okay, well, perhaps I need to change things around you to make this work. I have more privilege, I will say, than a lot of our mainstream colleagues, because some of the rigor that is around primary and secondary schools, I think, is very, very unhelpful. And in AP and SEN, I don't have some of the same things that are controlling me in that sense. So I do have more creative freedom, but fundamentally, I don't think we flex enough as a profession sometimes.
Thanks, Nick. Is there one strategy that stands out to you the most as having the most impact that you think is worth highlighting? The one that, in terms of improving behaviour, has tangibly made the biggest impact that you'd like to share?
Really easy. Meet and greet and every child, I mean, I'm not talking about every child being individual. I have almost 900 children, but I probably know 400 of them by name and 200 of them by how they like their toast breaded, buttered and cut. That's a personal mission of mine because those 200 are probably my hardest 200 children to reach. And they come out and talk to me, but actually people on the ground knowing those children and having those key individuals that they know they can turn to and be open and honest with has the most tremendous impact. If they feel that they are welcome and that they've got people there, it works wonders, both short term and long term. So
great, thank you very much, Nick. That's great. And Dave, we'll come to your good self there, please. So, what have you tried, adopted, experimented with? And from those that you've adopted, what stands out the most as being the most successful for your school, Dave, please?
I think it was really refreshing to hear Nick saying those things. I'm in agreement with all of them. I think the thing that stood out for me, I mean, there isn't a one quick strategy. The reality is we have tried all sorts. We change weekly. We're trying everything. But I think the one thing that it comes down to is relationships and the relational approach that we've introduced, the whole Paul Dick stuff. And you seem to have this tension, which is why it was so refreshing listening to Nick. You got this tension of secondaries, and forgive me for generalizing, but you seem to have a lot of the narrative silent corridors and control and things like that. Whereas on the other side of it, you seem to have primary the discussion is much more around the relational approach. And I appreciate it's a very, very different world and it takes such a long time, but we're now years down the line with the relational approach. It was a real stretch for a lot of staff at the beginning. I think there was a perception that there aren't any consequences and things like that. And I Googled it to try and explain in a really short way, it's about consistency, kindness, and clear boundaries. It's about the kids knowing that you care about them, that you want to support them, that you want to help them. And between all of the adults and with the families, so for me, it's that relational approach. What I would then tag alongside that is the open play strategy that we've introduced, the outdoor play and learning. When you think that, kids play out for 20% of the time at school, yet we throw them out with our least experienced members of staff, least qualified, least well paid. We don't really spend a huge amount of time with them. Our kids have missed out on communicating, taking turns and things like that during COVID. And then we're surprised when it all goes wrong. So we've had a real, drive towards improving the outdoor spaces and how we do the play. Then with the relational approach, when it does go wrong, they can fix it. And we literally can fix most things within a minute. Our mantra of being safe, being ready, being kind and fixing it, is consistently applied across the school. And that's what Nick said, isn't it? It's that consistency of approach, that the way that we communicate it, the staff training that you put in place. I don't think that there are any quick fixes, and I think we're all desperate to try and find something that changes things really quickly, when the reality is it has to be a much bigger, longer term view, which is really difficult when you've got Ofsted on the horizon and the constant pressure to turn things around. So there's a real tension between short term trying to do things and getting the results, whatever that means. But the bigger, more exciting stuff happens over a much longer period.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And again, same question, Dave, as I asked Nick. Is there one thing in your mind that you've tried, that you've adopted, that has made the most impact? Just one thing that really stands out for you to say that's made a tangible impact in your school.
I'd probably echo what Nick said: consistency, consistency of approach. So that it's a hard one. I've really thought about that one, and I'm not sure that there is. It's so much going on all at the same time. I agree with we do the meet and greet, and I love the fact that how the toast is buttered. That's the season, Nick. You smile. I think that's amazing. You're absolutely right, and I think there are lots of colleagues out there that would think and try to do the same. I want to give it's the relationships. It is the relationships that the children feel consistently that they are cared for, they are listened, that they're being supportive. I think where it goes wrong is when staff suddenly get stressed. They've tried everything, then suddenly they get stressed and they snap, and it's totally normal, it's totally human. But I think that all of that hard work with the relational approach suddenly goes out the window and you've got to start all over again. So I actually would, I think it's relationships.
Thanks so much, Dave. And we're going to let Dave, Vaseem, and Nick just have a couple of minutes rest now, because the question is coming over to Michael and Danny. So as the leaders in this space, supporting Matt, supporting schools, dealing with problematic student behaviour, minute in, minute out, hour in, hour out, day in, day out, etc. Right now as we talk, so again, not the pandemic, right now as we talk, what are the most popular calls you get, emails you receive? Can you help us with this? Can you help us with that? What does the current behaviour, let's say, hotspot look like to you guys, supporting schools and maths? What does that look like, Danny and Michael, please?
I think, there's huge factors, and there's going to be a lot of echoing of what Dave and Nick have talked about here, because they're absolutely key. I think we get many calls, inquiries, etc., regarding need within schools, in terms of the difficulties that they're facing. Some of those are reactive to situations. Some schools are, shall we say, more proactive with trying to get to a point where I suppose they want to understand and support the process, similar to what Dave and Nick were talking about, of reframing behaviour and how behaviour is perceived. So there's a balance of both in terms of the requirements and the needs in schools, and the difficulties they may be having from both a reactive point of view and a proactive point of view. And I think what it does come down to, whether it is a reactive or proactive kind of inquiry to us for the support that they're looking for, it comes down to make it actually, in the end, comes down to the same thing of providing, ensuring that support and that consistency, as have already been talked about, is there within those schools. And I think what we are there to try and support is to ensure that that consistency of approach is there, really. We are huge drivers, and very passionate about exactly what Dave and Nick were talking about around relational approaches. It is the key driver for us to ensuring consistent behavioural change in children. Well, not just in children, to pick up on what Dave said, actually, for us as adults as well. Because within schools, as Dave mentioned, it can be very some situations, escalated situations, crisis points, etc. Staff can find it really difficult to manage those, really, and it's about ensuring that we're providing that understanding and support to staff to make sure that they are checking in on their own emotional context and where they are at themselves in that moment in time. Because many times, we can all make some situations escalate or de-escalate depending on our responses to that situation and depending on our relational approaches to that, really. So I suppose in terms of obviously what the schools are coming to us for, and how we're supporting that, as I say, yeah, there are some schools that are coming from a reactive point of view where they're really struggling with a child with significant complex needs, and the heightened crisis behaviours are there, whereas other schools are coming with more of a need for that, and a want for that proactive approach to understand what can we put in place to really change the concept of how we reframe behaviour, really, and how we understand behaviour. And I always said, the word behaviours, I don't know if people will agree with this, but I believe it has a very negative connotation to it. I think when you say that word behaviour, I think many people very quickly go to those negative, challenging things, because actually those behaviours are really easy to see. They may be running off, throwing things, shouting expletives to staff, whatever it may be. Those behaviours are really easy to see. What we don't see and pick up on sometimes is actually the positive things we want to do. And we always say, the more we pay attention to behaviour and provide that attention to that behaviour, the more that behaviour is going to, happen again and again and again. So, key to it is, as they've said, as Dave and Nick have already talked about, really is that connection and that relationship, really. And a lot of our work is supporting schools in helping them to really build that context and build that whole school strategist, because that's what it's about. It's ensuring that whole school strategy is around that approach. Behavior policies now are so outdated in terms of the practices and processes, where actually so much so, schools are now changing those around to, relationship policies rather than behavior policies, because that straight away drives the message to staff within schools, along with, CPD to support that, but really drives that message that leaders want in terms of delivering that change and understanding and reframing behaviour. So a lot of our work is around that as well as a lot of the kind of individual intervention work that we're doing. But yeah, so much stuff around that, and key to it, as I've talked about, is that connection, and relationships. And we always say the key approach is connection before correction. That is absolutely key to providing.
Danny, I know you and I have spoken in the past as well, haven't we? As recently as a month or so ago, about actually thinking of managing behaviour as a culture, creating a positive culture, making it as you said, a proactive thing, not a reactive thing. And you and I spoke at length about that over the last month or so.
Absolutely.
In terms of what does that look like, designing it, executing it, making sure it's being done, not just tether away. So I think that's really key as well, and that stood out to me personally from our conversations. And just to keep us on track, everybody, just very quickly, I've got one last question for our panelists, and I'm going to go reverse order this time. So it's going to be Nick, Dave, and then Vaseem, please. Nick, you've got a magic wand in your hand right now, and if there was one thing you could have a little spell for, and that spell would be granted, which would help you improve or help everybody, every school and mat, be able to improve their behaviour and reduce problematic behaviour, that one magic wish, Nick Brindle, would be?
To completely change the way we view progress. So it's actually something I preach on a regular basis. I don't quite understand how we can standardize or look at how schools are improving over each year, because everybody who works in education knows that an M1 teacher compared to an M2 teacher is a completely different beast. An M6 teacher compared to an M2 teacher. So the profession gets better, but also staff change. So that's why you could end up with some really good teachers one year and then some really bad ones the next. And most importantly, each year group is different. So then saying that, oh, you've dipped this year, well, yeah, no, of course, because they're a completely different year group. So actually, what I would do is I would heavily invest in standardized baselining. So actually, there's a national baseline that would allow everybody to understand the start points of. So if I had a year 10 group that was a centile 80 versus my last group that was a centile 90, and I was achieving in line with the previous one, we're doing really, really well. But then I can compare myself to other centile 80 schools rather than perhaps the grammar school down the road. And by doing that, you would be able to plan, and you'd be able to take things slower. You'd be able to assess what does progress really look like for a child at that. And the weirdest thing is we have that in EYFS, because we have early learning goals and stage development, and then we suddenly switch it up and it becomes like standardized tests of where we think they should be. So if I could change anything, that's exactly what I would change, because you would level the playing field and you would encourage more schools to be inclusive, because they would be judged on the progress they make from a start point, rather than having to reach a bar that some children it's like climbing Everest for, and others it's a walk in the park.
Yeah, thank you very, very much indeed, Nick. That's great. Dave, your magic wand moment. This is your moment, Dave.
Right, Nick, you were really wise and profound and really eloquent, and I really like you. We're gonna have a brew at some point. You can't say no. I'm afraid mine's really crude. I'm gonna use my magic wand to have a magic money tree. We need the funding in order to put the support in for the children and who need it. That not just that child, but the rest of the children in the class, the families. It's really frustrating. The amount of families that come in tears. Because they're struggling to cope, or the staff that are struggling to cope, the child who's in the wrong place. Mine is a lot more crude. I just want money, please, so I can put the support in place.
Thank you, Dave. Vaseem, What's your magic wand moment, sir?
I totally agree with Dave. My magic word is funding. I think if we get more funding for schools, that gives opportunity and access to agencies, especially the well-being of children, because sometimes schools just simply can't afford it. And we have increased the number of children with special needs, with behavioral needs, and a teacher can't cope. At the same time, we need to look after the teacher's well-being as well. And then when the teacher can't cope because they haven't got the support or the financial support from the top, what happens to the class teacher? They're signed off for a week or 2 or 3 because they're exhausted. So funding is very key for to close that bridge with the well-being, the behavior issues of children, but also the gap of the learning, the progress. Because as much as I agree with Nick, progress shouldn't be there in that sense to be compared. But at the end of the day, that's why the local consortium, the government, the national targets, they set those statistics there for staff to achieve, for schools to achieve. And it's very hard, especially with the situation with our children post-COVID. So I think if you want things to be success, improve behavior is funding.
Thank you very much for saying. And gentlemen, I'm going to come to yourself, Michael, this time. Please don't think I've been leaving you out, Michael. I haven't. I know that.
I know how much Danny talks.
It's a dynamic duo. So the question for Michael, your magic wand moment, looking at it again with the interesting different lens, Michael, if you had a magic wand, what would that look like to help improve behavior and decrease problematic behavior in schools and maths?
I think it's really easy for me. I think going off what everybody else has said about building relationships, I think it's if we could create a space, maybe 2 or 3 weeks at the beginning of every school year that doesn't impact on learning, but where staff and pupils can build relationships. I think it would just have a huge impact throughout the year if they could spend that time getting to know each other, getting to know how they tick, getting to know how each other, what are triggers and what aren't, and what, how we can make it work for people and how we can make it work for pupils. I think it would help with staff burnout. I think it would help the children to be in a better place to go and learn. I think, and obviously it would support transition every year as well. I just think that would be so impactful.
I think it's a brilliant idea. Thank you, Michael. And question of the night, if you like, is from Hayley to Nick Brindle. Nick, can I just read Hayley's question? When are you going to begin your education minister, Nick?
Yeah, I don't think they'd have me. I'd be classed as too bullshit. I'd have the whip removed from me within about 1 hour of being appointed.
Not at all. Great question, and thanks, Hayley, and thanks to everybody. We hope you've enjoyed the session. Apologies for being slightly over 5 or 6 minutes, but we hope you've enjoyed the content. A massive thank you to Dave, to Vaseem, to Nick, to Michael, and to Danny. We're incredibly grateful. If I could just ask everyone just to stay where you are for a few seconds, just so we can get a little bit of feedback from you, we'd be incredibly grateful. And on that note, I'd like to wish you a lovely evening. So thank you everyone for coming, and good night. Thank you.